Sara Stevens is on the cruise of a lifetime. She loves being away from the hectic reality of day-to-day life, even if it is just for 2 weeks. Sara's with her partner, James McLeod, on an all-expense-paid cruise around the Gulf Coast of Florida. They won the cruise through a scratch-and-win lottery game. They get the VIP treatment, all for free. James and Sara enjoy the fun and friendly atmosphere on board the cruise ship. The couple becomes acquaintances with a young man named Ted. James takes a shine to him, but Sara doesn't fully trust Ted yet. Sara and James don't always see eye to eye, but deep down, they do truly love each other. But there is potentially greater dangers lurking on this massive cruise ship. Could a picture-perfect cruise turn into a deadly disaster? Off the coast of Florida, a massive cruise ship is making its tour of the Gulf of Mexico. There are over 1,200 passengers on board. Among them is a young couple enjoying an all-inclusive free vacation. But is there a darker side to their lives that they're bringing along with them? Sara Stevens grew up in Atlanta and moves to South Florida to attend college. Sara takes a part-time bartending job to help pay for college and is able to balance school and work for the first year. Her sweet and gentle disposition makes it easy to attract new friends. She quickly becomes acquainted with her coworkers.
I met Sara at a restaurant that I was working at, and she was always cheerful and smiley, and she was the nicest person I've ever met.
But it's not only her coworkers' friendship that she attracts. It's around this time that Sara meets James McLeod while at work. James is a few years older than Sara and never went to college. He's a regular here. He comes in almost every day after work, especially when Sara's working. It isn't long before the two of them strike up a relationship. James and Sara move in together after only a few months, but the honeymoon phase is quickly over. For the holiday season, the bar owner gives a bonus and a lottery scratch card to all of his staff in a kindly gesture. Sara wins an all-inclusive cruise ship voyage around the Gulf of Mexico for 2 people, the ultimate grand prize. She feels for once that she's getting a lucky break. Through all the hard times in her life, Sara had never given up hope, and now she gets the opportunity of a lifetime. She's finally getting the chance to travel and see the world a little, and she gets to go with James, the love of her life. Sara and James enjoy themselves the first few days on board their 2-week-long cruise. They put their worries behind them for the time being and enjoy themselves. They know it won't last forever, so they don't waste a moment. Sara meets a young man named Ted. She finds his flirtatious behavior obnoxious. She rejects his advances and goes to find James. Later on, James meets Ted at the bar. But unlike Sara, Ted and James hit it off. They bond over sports and cars. James is happy to chat with another guy after a few days with just Sara. Unaware Sara and Ted had already met, James brings his newfound friend back to meet his girlfriend. Sara's not happy with James, but he's none the wiser. Ted is making Sara very uncomfortable with his extended stares. Could Ted have intentionally made friends with James to get closer to Sara? James does not seem to notice, or perhaps care, that Ted has taken a fancy to Sara. He now has a new audience for his tried and tested jokes and classic stories that Sara has heard 1,000 times. Intoxicated and enamored with his new friend, James insists Ted join them for dinner. Sara protests, wanting the leering to end for the night, but James wins out, as he always does. At this point, James becomes so oblivious to Sara and all of her emotions that he doesn't even notice her getting upset at dinner. Ted can barely take his eyes off her. James wants to know why Sara isn't eating her meal. His demeanor is aggressive as he inquires why she isn't interested in their conversations. She can barely sputter out a response before she starts crying and runs out. Sara returns from dinner to find their cabin broken into. With clothes strewn everywhere, Sara finds her laptop, her jewelry, and all the rest of their valuable items. Is anything even missing? In an instant, Sara realizes the only thing missing is her underwear. Sara is repulsed by the invasion of privacy and the sexual nature of this crime. Sara is in such a panic that she tells the first person possible, who happens to be her cabin neighbor, Rhonda. After calming Sara down, Rhonda tells her she heard a commotion moments earlier. Sara knows that the commotion Rhonda speaks of must have been the robber in action. Rhonda isn't able to give a description of the person since she never sees a face. Sara's distraught, and it's noticeable. The ship's crew lend a sympathetic ear. Sara tells the attendant about being robbed and how that is making her scared. She wonders aloud if they can move cabins to avoid a repeat visit. But for this, the crew has little to offer. The cruise is full. There are no empty cabins to offer Sara, despite her predicament. The attendant can do little for Sara, but tell her that she can disembark at the next stop at her own cost. Hardly an offer worth taking. Sara notices another man acting strangely around her. Could this be the mysterious underwear thief? Sara quickens her pace and hurries into her room. She isn't about to hang around and find out who this guy is.
She feels targeted. She's in a difficult position here because she's on a cruise ship and somebody has broken into her cabin and robbed her of something very personal.
When James arrives back at the room intoxicated, he's upset and wonders what happened to their cabin. Sara blurts out that they were robbed and she tried to find him to tell him. James isn't immediately aware of anything missing. Upset and violated, Sara exclaims someone stole her underwear. James doesn't believe her. He figures she's overreacting and she misplaced or forgot her underwear at home. James only returns to the room to take painkillers for his bad knee. He's having too much fun to worry about something as trivial as missing underwear. If she wants to stay in their cabin, that's fine. But he's heading back to one of the bars to have some fun. Maybe bump into his new drinking buddy, Ted. He's not going to let Sara disrupt his good times at the bar. After the creep breaking in, Sara's scared of being alone and wants some company. Little does James know, Sara's fear of being alone shouldn't be overlooked, as this is the last time he'll see her alive. Sara Stevens wins the trip of a lifetime through a lottery game, an all-inclusive 2-week cruise around the Gulf of Mexico. She's excited to get away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life and spend 2 whole weeks with her longtime boyfriend, James McLeod. But Sara's trip to paradise is spoiled by a break-in to their cabin. Oddly, the only thing missing are her undergarments. Is there a stranger on board looking to steal from Sara, or maybe more? James and Sara have met a new acquaintance, Ted. Although Sara feels uncomfortable around Ted due to his flirtatious nature, James connects with him. James returns for a late-night solo visit to the bar, leaving Sara alone for 2 hours. He looks for his new friend Ted, but with Ted nowhere to be found, James drinks by himself before returning to his cabin. James finds the body of his girlfriend, Sara Stevens, in their cabin. At first glance, it appears to be a suicide. But what drives a young woman to such lengths when she has so much to live for?
Then I got the news that Sara committed suicide, and I was like, no way. That's not Sara. And I was just confused.
Traumatized, James cries for help as he backs out of the room. Ted's cabin is nearby. He hears James' cries for help and rushes over. James tells Ted he found Sara hanging and took her down to see if she was alive. But he was too late. James' emotions run wild, but security needs to clear the scene so it can be preserved.
Once an incident occurs and it's determined that it is in fact a crime scene, it's very important that investigators preserve the scene as closely as possible to the way they found it. Evidence is there, trace evidence is there that may easily be contaminated or washed away, removed. So if we don't preserve that scene, that evidence is gone forever.
Sara's cabin neighbor, Rhonda, comes forward to the cruise ship staff to see if they are following up on the robbery at Sara's cabin earlier that evening. Could her death and the robbery be connected?
As an investigator, when somebody reports having been the victim of a crime, even a relatively petty theft, and then turns up dead, absolutely those 2 items would be connected in the mind of the investigator.
James McLeod is distraught, but sits down with investigators. He hopes to uncover what happened to his girlfriend, who seems to have died from an apparent suicide. James almost immediately brings up his new drinking buddy, Ted, in a suspicious matter. He insists the captain bring Ted in. James is hostile towards Ted, and the captain asks James to leave.
Well, I think in any case, our job as an investigator is to get the most accurate picture of what occurred, and that involves getting a story from each individual without any input from anyone else. If you were to have 2 people who are antagonistic towards each other in the same room while you were trying to interview one or the other or both, I think the story you're going to get would be a lot further from the truth than what you would anticipate getting.
The captain makes sure Ted is 100% focused on him before informing him that he is now a suspect. The captain isn't capable of arresting Ted, but he can detain him until the next morning when the proper authorities arrive.
Often there's a lot of confusion over the two terms, detaining and arresting. And I think the easiest way for me to explain it would be to say that an arrest involves a specific accusation of involvement in a particular event, whereas a detention is an exercise of the investigator's rights to hold somebody to gather evidence.
A small crowd of curious onlookers gather around Sara's cabin to see what's going on. The ship's security team works to keep them back. The area is still an active crime scene and needs to be preserved until police can investigate.
Criminals do return to the scene of the crime for a number of reasons. They often want to see how the investigation is going. They want some insight into, are the cops close to chasing them? Are they getting any leads? Is there any information that implicates them? That's one reason that they come back. Another, just for the perverse pleasure of watching all the chaos that they've created. So you never know when you're at a crime scene who's an innocent bystander and who might have more of a guilty conscience.
The day after the death of Sara Stevens, the captain comes in to inform Ted that the ship is in port, and the police are on board coming up to see him. Investigators show up on the scene and have a lot to catch up on. With many angles to pursue, the police leave Ted to stew a while longer before they interview him.
There are techniques that investigators use. When somebody is aware that they're about to be questioned by the police, there's a certain amount of stress involved in that, just naturally. And leaving somebody to think about what questions may be asked of them by the investigators is a good way to sort of generate a level of anxiety within that person, which could help an investigator extract a certain information from them.
Now the investigators are ready to go. Ted is still largely in the dark on what grounds he's being detained. The police have to ask Ted what he knows about the death of Sara Stevens. Sara Stevens and her boyfriend James McLeod are on the trip of a lifetime. Sara wins an all-inclusive cruise around the Gulf of Mexico through a scratch-and-win lottery game. But tragedy strikes. James finds Sara dead by apparent suicide. But could there be foul play involved? Could her death be a frame-up to let the killer avoid detection? The cruise ship docks the day after Sara's death. Police board the ship to investigate the cause of her death. They only have a few hours to inspect the crime scene, collect evidence, and interview suspects before making an arrest so the cruise can continue. Police detain Ted because they suspect he knows more about the case of Sara Stevens. Police interrogate Ted, but he's given the chance to tell his side of the story to the investigators. Ted tells the captain about the dinner he had with the couple. He describes them as erratic and frequently mad at each other, and James as a pill popper and heavy drinker. The investigators decide to let Ted go back to his cabin so they can investigate further, but tell him not to go far. As Ted leaves, a cabin neighbor of James and Sara's is brought in. She claims she heard some commotion coming from their cabin around the time of Sara's death.
Yeah, we often talk about the term eyewitness, and we think of the fact where somebody has actually seen what occurred, but if you could picture someone hearing something without actually seeing an event, they would be, sort of an equivalent to an eyewitness, in that the information that they heard is just as valuable. Conversations, screams or arguments, banging sounds. That's all just as important as an actual visual memory.
But upon seeing Ted, Rhonda is going to reveal some more important news. Rhonda claims she saw Ted walk down the hall past Sara and James' cabin more than once earlier the night of the murder. She says she remembers him so clearly by the way his eyes never stopped moving and never fixated on one thing. Rhonda also notices a distinct tattoo of a snake on Ted's forearm. The image sinks into her memory.
When a person can bring information such as specific tattoos or a deformity or something as simple as, a slight limp, that goes a long way in identifying a particular person and removes that person from the greater group of people and narrows it down so investigators, have somewhere more pointed to look.
Rhonda's eye and ear witness testimony is very valuable information. Could Ted be hiding something? Would he have been able to get into Sara's cabin? Meanwhile, Ted attempts to reconcile with James and show there's no ill will. James, on the other hand, has some prickly emotions for Ted at the moment. Despite his best efforts, Ted is not able to calm James down, and he starts to back off. James walks away in a rage. After questioning a few cruise guests, the investigators head back to Sara's room. They inspect for any bloodstains or disturbances in the room. Some clues are easier to find than others. A laptop cable is left in the room, but with no laptop, it suggests some items were taken from the room, and whoever did it was probably in a hurry.
Well, in this particular case, the items that are stolen, while, we don't have them in front of us, knowing what they were is a type of evidence. Very personal items point to the fact that this is perhaps a crime that involves somebody known to the victim. Laptops, which we use for email and social messaging and that type of thing, are almost like a diary. They provide first-hand accounts of the victim's story, which, wouldn't be known to the perpetrator.
Investigators call Ted back in for more questioning. He continues to assert that he knows nothing about Sara's death, but he offers to go into more detail about what he observed while spending time with James and Sara. Again, Ted describes their relationship as erratic and Sara as a depressed person. He makes the point of telling how much James was drinking. Ted then points out that James was addicted to his painkillers. He describes James as having violent mood swings between incredibly personable and wildly ruthless. And it's evident to everyone around them that Sara takes the brunt of James's mood swings. Investigators take this information down, but they really want to know where Ted was in the hours when Sara died. Ted tells them he was alone in his cabin, reading a book.
Let's hope none of us are so unfortunate as to know someone who's been murdered and not have a proper alibi. This is what happened to Ted. While his story is believable, he has no one to back him up. His story is that he went back to his cabin and spent the night alone. Sounds truthful, but there's no one to say whether it is or not.
Ted is at his wit's end with the investigators. He's telling them all he knows. But is he being truthful about his whereabouts that night? Sara meets a horrific fate on board the cruise. Initially thought to be a suicide, now investigators are getting closer to finding out how Sara Stevens really and truly died. The ship is in port. as investigators question guests before they make an arrest so the cruise can continue. One of those guests is Ted, who is an acquaintance of both James and Sara. He's a key suspect, but claims James is an alcoholic pill popper, and Sara is a depressed woman. The ship's passengers are getting annoyed that their vacation is being delayed by the police. But little do they know, investigators have just uncovered a critical piece of evidence. The captain is able to provide investigators with the ship's log. From that document, they can determine how many times a key card is used to enter a specific cabin.
Yeah, when we're talking about the electronic key cards, which gives them access to their room, that system tracks when they enter their room, where they go on the ship, whenever they need to swipe their card. There is an ability to track passengers on the ship through the use of their scan cards.
The records show that neither Ted nor Sara's cabins were opened with the key card in the time in question. But it doesn't have any proof that they weren't opened from the inside. Police need to question James before they can make any judgments on Ted's statements. Until then, Ted will sit and wait. As the coroner's office takes the body away for further examination, the investigators move on to interview James.
If a person's in an intimate relationship with someone, statistically, we would believe that perhaps that partner might be involved because of the high level of emotion involved. So their relationships become important.
As James is being questioned about finding Sara's body, he becomes emotional. The police allow him a moment to grieve. After all, his longtime girlfriend has just died. But when investigators bring up Ted, they see a different side of James. He lashes out and his eyes become wild. The police are able to calm James down, but they exchange a glance. Maybe James does have a temper. James tells investigators his side of the dinner he and Sara had with Ted. James describes Ted as fixated on Sara. When pressed, James denies being drunk and instead claims Ted was the one who was drunk. Police note the inconsistency. Sara and James' cabin neighbor is already familiar with the police who are investigating. She tells them about seeing Ted outside their cabin. Rhonda returns again to get an update on the robbery, which occurred the same evening as the murder. To her surprise, the investigators hear this for the first time. She assumed security would have filled them in on the situation. The front desk attendant apologizes for forgetting the incident, but remembers to tell investigators that the security footage is ready for them to view. Police find a treasure trove of evidence in the ship's security tapes. This is what the police need to corroborate the witness testimony they've received. Reviewing the security footage, the investigators determine that the initial robbery could not have been committed by Ted. The man in the video is far too short. They do notice something distinct about the underwear thief: his shoes. With the help of the cruise ship staff, the police are quickly able to ID the alleged underpants thief. They head out to speak to him. What does he know about Sara's death, and why would he want her underwear? Mike is enjoying a nice beverage with his wife when he notices the cops approaching. He panics. He knows why they're there. Sandra, his wife, is entirely confused when the investigators walk up and ask Mike to come with them. Investigators bring Mike to his room. They need to search it to see if he is in fact the one who burglared Sara's underwear.
Well, anyone that's considered a suspect in a crime, we would want removed from the crime scene as quickly as possible. to avoid having them contaminate the crime scene or destroy any evidence that may be there. So obviously having them removed is important to the investigation.
In fact, Mike turns out to be the underwear robber, a disturbing behavior on its own, but is it enough to be motive for murder? Could there be more that Mike is trying to hide along with the stolen underwear? With 3 suspects, the investigators are closing in on an arrest so the crews can continue. James, Ted, and Mike are all on the police's radar. But they need cold, hard evidence before they take anyone away and determine if Sarah's death was suicide or a murder. As investigators continue their probe into Sarah's death, a laptop has gone missing from Sarah's cabin. Police have yet to turn up this item in a ship-wide search. They decide it's more likely that it has been destroyed to hide the evidence than stolen. They need to find some concrete evidence to begin to find the cause of death and shortlist their suspects. The investigators finally receive information that will help them do that. The police have been investigating the death of Sarah Stevens on board the cruise ship for the past couple hours. There are 1,200 passengers on board who are getting angry about the cruise's delay, which will continue after the police wrap up their investigation. Ted is very involved in the group calling for the ship to set sail again. Investigators are wary of moves like this. With the new information they just received, the investigators decide to bring Ted, James, and Mike back in for one final round of questioning. The initial autopsy does not show marks around the entire neck, nor has the neck been stretched or broken. This means she probably didn't hang herself, but instead was strangled. If this is true, what are James, Ted, and Mike not telling the police? Could they have worked together, or is there only one murderer of the 3? James McLeod's dream cruise ship vacation is shattered when he finds his girlfriend Sarah Stevens dead of an apparent suicide. The police need to tie up a loose end, and they call Ted in to answer why he was lurking outside of Sarah's room. He responds that he felt awkward about attending dinner with them and was going to cancel their plans. They come to the conclusion that Ted is in fact telling the truth. The video shows Ted lurking in the hall and leaving when Sarah's cabin neighbor Rhonda approaches. This is backed up by Rhonda's statement earlier. The footage from later that evening shows that he doesn't leave his cabin until after Sarah's body's found. Ted is free to go back to his cruise. With Ted no longer a suspect, this leaves only Mike and James. They bring Mike in for questioning first, and it's time to face the music. They know that he desires Sarah's undergarments, but how far is he willing to go to get them? Mike immediately denies everything related to her death. His wife is his alibi. Sandra is able to corroborate everything Mike says. They are in their cabin at the time of the murder. Police are able to back this up with the security footage from their hallway. With no evidence connecting him to the death of Sarah Stevens, Mike is let go. He is a profoundly strange person, but he's innocent of murder. The police have brought James in again. Strange is his normal, but James is acting especially erratic. Fearing for their own safety, police search James for any weapons. The only thing they find is a bottle of painkillers and a flask of whiskey. Police have to calm James down. He's worried that he's in trouble for having pills and booze on him. Investigators turn his attention to larger, more pressing matters. Scientific evidence from the autopsy that Sara could not have died from hanging. They know she did not die by her own hand. But who could have done this? What more evidence do the police have?
Whenever someone dies mysteriously or there's believed to be foul play, you always look at the spouse or significant other first. There's a reason for that. When someone dies mysteriously or is murdered, it's often the person closest to them who has committed the crime.
Slowly but surely, making their way through the security footage from that night, investigators have determined that James and Sara were the only people who entered their cabin that night. This may be the cold hard evidence they need to arrest James for the murder of his girlfriend, Sara Stevens. Police confront James about whether he had any involvement in Sara's death. James avoids the question and instead admits to doing prescription painkillers and excessive drinking. He insists he did nothing wrong. The police have another powerful piece of evidence they present to James. The autopsy shows significant bruising on Sara, some of it from hours or days before her death. James is speechless. He has never been confronted about his abuse of Sara, and he continues to deny it to the police.
James never made eye contact with anyone but Sara. He was really hard to figure out. He had this bad, negative energy around him. I never liked his presence.
Investigators again have evidence to refute the claims James is making. They can show him the video to prove it. The security footage is undeniable evidence that James lied about what happened during the dinner with Ted. James contends he simply remembered wrong. They are also able to show him the footage of their door. It shows James and Sara entering. An hour later, James leaves alone. 2 hours later, he returns and finds Sara dead. But could Sara have been dead in their cabin the whole time? Did James stage her death to look like a suicide? Why is it that only James ever saw Sara's body hanging? The police continue to press James as it becomes more clear that his statements are full of lies. The more they dig, the more truth comes out. The police ask James what happened to Sara's laptop. James doesn't have an answer. The laptop may have information that could help lead investigators to an arrest.
Sara always had her laptop with her. She had everything on it. Any break from work she had, she was always on it.
The police tell James they've contacted Sara's family about her death. When the police question her family about James, they tell them they've had concerns for her safety. In the past, they had noticed her trying to hide bruises. James is still adamant that he was not involved in Sara's death. From his perspective, there was no wrongdoing. James claims that he and Sara came back from their cabin after having made up and got drunk at one of the cruise ship's bars. Sara is further gone than he is. James does the gentlemanly thing and helps her into bed before heading back down to the bar for a nightcap. James details his version of finding Sara's body hanging from the ceiling fan. He claims he immediately took her down because he wanted to see if she was alive. He wasn't thinking about the integrity of the crime scene. As James concludes his version of the events that night, investigators look him up and down carefully. Is James McLeod capable of cold-blooded murder? Could alcohol and painkillers make a violent streak become deadly? Or has a slow progression of abuse turned into murder? Police conclude that the ceiling fan could not support a person. The autopsy backs that up, noting that Sara did not die from hanging. With James being the only one with access to the room and his alcohol and drug abuse, police arrest him on charges of murdering Sara Stevens. James is brought to prison, where he's met by his public defender lawyer. James knows his chances are slim at a criminal trial. His lawyer tells him they should aim for the lesser charge of manslaughter. It is the only way to avoid having the book thrown at him in trial. Or does he have a deeper plot to avoid responsibility for his alleged crimes?
Making a murder look like a suicide is a horrible thing to do. Just think about it, all the guilt that the victim's family will go through, wondering why they didn't notice anything was wrong, why they didn't see the signs, why would this person have killed themselves? You're putting the victim's family through another level of torture that isn't necessary.
As the defense and prosecution gather their evidence prior to the trial date, a bail amount of $20,000 is set for James. A relative of James comes through with the $20,000 bail, and he's released from jail. With his trial date looming in the near future, James is free for now.
The cash bail system allows for people accused of crimes to post a certain amount of cash to ensure or to prove that they will show up in court, because they obviously don't want to miss or forfeit the cash should they not show up and appear for their trial or any further proceedings.
James must be at the parole hearing in 24 hours. It appears as though he won't be making it this time. James sees his opportunity for freedom and takes it.
The problem with the bail system is that it allows people an opportunity to escape. And that's what happens with James. He, for some reason, gets a moment of freedom and he takes full advantage of it and gets away. This is one of the problems that happens sometimes, and until the system is fixed, it's very hard to prevent.
James decides to make the most of his newfound freedom by fleeing the country altogether.
I miss Sara every single day. There's so many things that remind me of her, and I want to call her and talk to her about it, and she's not there. I can't believe she's not there. I can't believe she was taken away from this world, and where's the justice? Where's the justice for her?
After winning the trip of a lifetime, Sara's life was taken too soon by her boyfriend James. He's currently missing, and his jail cell sits empty, awaiting his return.